Hello everyone. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the Frankenstein 1931 Universal Monsters movie. After the success of Dracula, Universal made Frankenstein based on Mary Shelley's novel. Just like Dracula, this was not the first Frankenstein movie. In 1910, there was a Thomas Edison Frankenstein film. Now, from what I've read, Thomas Edison did not direct the film supposedly, as people claimed that he did. And ever since then, there were other, silent Frankenstein films and shorts. But unfortunately, those films are no longer in existence today. Those are considered lost movies. Frankenstein was directed by James Wales, who did the sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein, a few years later. The film was produced by Carl Lammle Jr. The story was done by Richard Shayer, and the screenplay was done by Garrett Ford, Francis Edward Farragut, if I'm saying his name right. And the film stars Colin Clive, Mae Clark, Boris Karloff, Edward Von Sloan, Dwight Fry, Frederick Kerr, and John Boyles. The film was released on November 21st, 1931, and it grossed $12 million at the box office and was a huge success by critics and audiences. The story of Frankenstein is about Dr. Henry Frankenstein, who is a scientist who's obsessed with his experiments, and he wants to create a body to bring back to life to play God. His creation and experiments succeed, but unfortunately, once the monster is traumatized and misunderstood, the monster runs away. And when the monster runs away, he causes minor havoc to the town villagers. So Dr. Frankenstein teams up with the town villagers to find his creation and destroy it. Just like in my Dracula review, I'm going to show you some DVDs and Blu-rays I have of the Frankenstein movie, starting with... This is the first ever DVD I ever owned and ever saw Frankenstein on. This was released around 1999. I don't really know when my dad got this, but this was like the first DVD copy we ever owned of the first Frankenstein film. Because around that time, they were releasing DVDs at the time, and they were becoming the new VHS tapes at that time. And becoming more popular than VHS tapes, especially when they had bonus features and commentaries. And of course, around the mid-2000s, like 2004 or 5, Universal came out with a collector edition of all the Frankenstein films, and it's awesome. My dad was really excited for this collection, so was I. It has the first one, The Bride, Son, Ghost, House. And of course, again, because we're in 2021, actually a year ago, my dad upgraded and got the whole Blu-ray set of the Frankenstein Universal Monster movies. When I was a little kid growing up watching the Universal Monster movies, people would always ask me, what was your favorite of the monsters? And at that time, I really had, no particular answer what my favorite was. I had favorites. I loved, Dracula, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, the Invisible Man, the Mummy, the Bride of Frankenstein, the basic essentials. But in recent years, as I've gotten older, I think I have the answer now, what my favorite of the Universal Monster movies is. Basically, that answer would be Frankenstein, the first film, and not just the first movie, but the whole series from start to finish. What I like about this movie, how it shows an example about why playing God is not such a good thing. It's also crazy how, compared to being a kid and as an adult now watching this movie, as a kid, we're led to believe that the monster is evil and bad, but then as we get older and we learn that the monster is misunderstood and they do not know any better. But that's something I've noticed a lot in all these, Universal Monster movies. I love the gothic dark atmosphere of this film. It's probably one of my favorite, very visual, good-looking horror movies. It has that, German expression type feel. I love the thunder and lightning sound effects. That really adds the charm for the monster's creation to make it more scary. I love the opening scene. We see Fritz and Dr. Frankenstein rob a grave and steal a dead body. You look closely at the camera just as they're watching the funeral waiting to be done so they can get the dead body. You see like Dr. Henry Frankenstein tell Fritz to get down, and then when Dr. Frankenstein gets down, you can see like the horns on the cemetery fences. That's a symbol that he's the devil. Just like Dracula, this film is not really true and faithful to the novel of Frankenstein. But at the same time, I think this film did an amazing, spectacular job where the film like made it its own thing rather than being 100% true to the Frankenstein novel. Another scene that I like in this movie is when Edward von Sloan's character and Dr. Henry Frankenstein are talking about how Fritz accidentally stole the wrong brain, that it was the abnormal brain. You see the monster come in. He's got that like facial expression of like confusion, of not understanding what's going on. He doesn't understand a lot of things. I also like it how like when Dr. Frankenstein shows him the sun and he stands up and lifts his arms up. I always pointed that out as a symbol of like how a symbol being reborn, that he's been rejuvenated again and given a second chance in life. And everything is going just fine up until Fritz comes in and ruins everything, and all hell breaks loose. Fritz, you jerk. The characters and the actors in this film are just like brilliant, amazing, spectacular. Colin Clive's performance as Dr. Frankenstein is probably one of my favorite Dr. Frankenstein actors in films of the Frankenstein movies. What I like about his performance as Dr. Frankenstein is that he starts off as like evil, mad, insane, and sadistic. But after when he realizes creation was a mistake, he goes from being an evil, mad scientist to a good guy and helping the villagers destroy his creation. He starts off not sympathetic, but then later on, as the film goes on, he becomes likable to a certain degree. Before I dive into Boris Karloff's performance as the monster, I want to give a little side note. Despite the title of Frankenstein, people think that Frankenstein is the monster, but people don't realize that Frankenstein is the scientist who created the monster, that the monster has like no name. I'm not gonna lie, even I used to think the same thing to myself, and I didn't realize this until I started watching James Rolfe, aka the Angry Video Game Nerd, when he explained that to me. Ever since then, I've called the monster just the monster, or Frankenstein's monster, or the creature, but you can call him like either Frankenstein's monster, the monster, or the creature, whichever one you prefer. For me, I call him the monster, maybe sometimes Frankenstein's monster. Okay, now that I got that side note out of the way, here's my opinion about Boris Karloff's performance as the monster. He is just amazing, brilliant, iconic. He is probably just like how Bela Lugosi is Dracula, Boris Karloff is the Frankenstein monster in a nutshell. And again, he's definitely my personal favorite to have played the monster in a Frankenstein movie. What I also love about his performance as the monster in this film is I love how those facial expressions that he has in this face of like confusion, of not understanding a lot of things that he does not remember when he was alive. It's like he's been like reborn, restarting, learning the basic things and learning the basic proper lessons of life. I love the makeup on the monster's face, all credit to Jack Pierce. I love it how he's got that like zombie look. It's definitely obviously like my personal favorite look of the monster in a Frankenstein film. As I mentioned before, how like the monster is misunderstood. The scene like where he accidentally like throws the girl in the river, thinking that she'll float like one of the flowers. The monster did not mean to do that purposely. He just did not know any better. As I've gotten older, I've learned to appreciate and understand the fact that the monster is a misunderstood character, and he's a sad, tragic character that just like wanted to be accepted and loved by people. He didn't mean to hurt or harm anybody. He just did not know any better. Fritz, played by Dwight Frye, who you all know, remember, who played Renfield in Dracula. When you think about it, him and Edward von Sloan, the only two actors to play in this movie. If you watch Dracula and Frankenstein back to back, it's like watching a Twilight Zone anthology show where you have some of the actors from the first Dracula film bounce into a new movie with playing different characters. His character was such a complete idiot, moron, asshole that if he had listened to Dr. Frankenstein of just leaving the monster alone, he would not have died by getting hung up by the monster. And I don't understand why Fritz had such a hatred towards the monster, especially the fact that he helped Dr. Frankenstein create the monster. Now what's all this hate over all of a sudden? And he's such a jerk for torturing the monster and not leaving him alone. After when Dr. Frankenstein creates the monster, and he shouts, "It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! Oh, in the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be a god!" Believe it or not, back in 1931, that line was cut because they were afraid about how the audiences would find that line sacrilegious. It wasn't until the 90s when it was finally released on VHS tape that they finally were able to restore and edit that line in there. One thing that I kind of find a little bit funny that I never really gave much of a thought about until in recent years watching this movie is when Dr. Frankenstein and Fritz are getting ready to perform the experiment. Elizabeth, Victor, and Edward von Sloan's character are knocking on the door. Fritz walks down the stairs with some little small cane, and he puts his sock up, and it's funny because they could have cut that part out. It would not have affected. It had nothing to do with that scene of the story. My father told me my grandfather used to laugh at that scene hysterically because of how stupid it was, and they just kept that scene in there when Fritz is dragging his sock up. The scene when the monster scares and attacks Elizabeth. What's interesting about that scene is that Mae Clark found Boris Karloff makeup so scary and realistic. He told her that if you see me wiggle my finger, it means I'm acting, I'm not being serious. But in the novel, Elizabeth dies, whereas in the film, she basically is afraid and she gets shocked by the monster, and the monster doesn't kill her. I love Mae Clark's performance in this movie as Elizabeth. She's very lovable, very caring. She really loves and cares about Henry. And she shows really big concern for him and how much his work has taken over his life. You could also maybe point out, get the hint that maybe Henry's friend Victor, they were having a secret affair, but they never really explained that. And I think it's kind of a good thing they didn't go that far deep into that, because I think Victor really cared about Henry, respected Henry, that Elizabeth was not his girlfriend. I love the final confrontation between the monster and Dr. Frankenstein. The monster kidnaps Frankenstein and takes him to a windmill. Frankenstein is trying to escape, and the monster looks at him with anger and hatred, why did you bring me back to life? Why would you not let me rest in peace? Why would you not let me die? It's a great facial expression without dialogue of showing how much the monster is angry at Frankenstein for creating him and bringing him back to life. It also shows how the monster hates Frankenstein for what he made him. With Boris Karloff playing the monster in this movie, Bela Lugosi, fresh off his success from Dracula, was offered the role of the monster, but he ended up turning it down because he didn't think the idea of a non-talking monster would be scary. He also did not want to be covered in the makeup either. And what's ironically is that Bela Lugosi said that he regretted turning down the part, even though he played the monster a decade later in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. It makes you wonder, what would have happened if Lugosi had not turned down this film and been the monster instead of Boris Karloff? Would Lugosi have had a longer respected career? Will we even have Boris Karloff? We'll never know. My one minor complaint about this movie is about the ending. I mean, I do love the ending. It's great. A great anticlimactic ending where the monster is burned and Henry Frankenstein is saved. I just wish they did not add the extra scene where the father like makes a toast when you see like Henry Frankenstein recovering. I feel like that wasn't necessary. It should have just ended where we see the monster being burned at the windmill and Frankenstein is saved. And then it could have just cut there. That's it, the end. But then again, Henry Frankenstein's father was a complete jerk anyway. It's interesting how, like, with Karloff playing the monster in this movie, in the opening credits, we don't know, like, who the actor is who plays the monster, because Karloff said that he did not want his name in the opening credits. He wanted the audience to find out at the end of who the monster was played by. So that was my review of Frankenstein. Stay tuned for The Bride of Frankenstein, and see you next time.